This is the story of how my husband and his entire family tried to steal my dead mother's inheritance money, and why what I did at that restaurant has them calling me the villain in their own scheme. What started as an innocent family dinner invitation turned into an ambush so calculated and cruel that it revealed who these people really were underneath their fake smiles. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the most polite thing you can do is walk away. 3 months ago, my world changed forever when my mother passed away after a long illness. She was my closest family member, my best friend, and losing her left a hole in my life that I'm still trying to figure out how to live with. In her will, my mother left me some money. It wasn't a life-changing amount, maybe enough for a nice vacation or to pay off some bills, but to me it represented so much more than its dollar value. This was the last gift from the woman who raised me, who sacrificed for me, and who wanted to make sure I was taken care of even after she was gone. My husband knew exactly how much this inheritance meant to me emotionally. He had watched me cry over losing my mother, had held me through the grief, and had heard me talk about how I wanted to use her final gift in a way that would honor her memory. I thought he understood the sacred nature of this money to me. His family had always been polite to me, but we weren't particularly close. They were the type of people who smiled to your face, but always seemed to be evaluating everything you did or said. When they invited me to join them for dinner at an upscale restaurant during this difficult time, I was actually touched by what seemed like genuine concern for my well-being. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs. When my husband mentioned the dinner invitation, he seemed unusually excited about it. He kept talking about how nice it would be to have a family celebration and how his parents were really looking forward to spending time with me. But there were little things that didn't quite add up. He was very specific about which restaurant we were going to, an expensive place that his family didn't normally choose for casual dinners. He also seemed unusually interested in whether I would be bringing my purse and my credit cards, which struck me as odd, but not necessarily suspicious. The night of the dinner, everyone seemed to be in an unusually good mood. His parents were more talkative than usual, his siblings were being extra friendly, and there was an atmosphere of anticipation that I couldn't quite understand. I thought maybe they were just trying to cheer me up during my period of grief. We ordered appetizers, entrees, drinks, the works. Everyone was encouraging me to try different dishes, suggesting we get dessert, talking about how wonderful it was to have the whole family together. The bill was clearly going to be substantial, but I wasn't worried because I assumed everyone would be paying for their own meals or splitting the check. As we were finishing our main courses and the conversation was flowing, someone made a comment about how nice it was that we could celebrate my inheritance. That struck me as a strange word choice. Celebrate? I wasn't celebrating my mother's death or the money that came from losing her. I was still grieving. But then my mother-in-law made a comment that made my blood run cold. She said something about how generous it was of me to treat everyone to such a nice dinner with my new money. She said it with a smile, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt confused and asked what she meant. That's when my father-in-law chimed in, saying how thoughtful it was of me to use some of my inheritance to show appreciation for the family's support during this difficult time. The entire table was nodding and smiling, like this had been the plan all along. My husband was sitting right next to me, and when I looked at him with confusion and growing alarm, he wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized that this entire dinner, this entire evening, had been a setup. I asked directly if everyone at this table was expecting me to pay for this dinner. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my sister-in-law said with a slight laugh that of course I was paying. That's why we were at such a nice restaurant to celebrate my good fortune. The audacity was breathtaking. They had invited me to an expensive restaurant, ordered freely knowing the bill would be huge, and had simply assumed that I would pay for everyone using the money I had inherited from my dead mother. They had planned this entire evening around spending my grief money without ever asking me if this was something I wanted to do. My husband finally spoke up, and instead of defending me or acknowledging that this was wrong, he said that he thought it would be nice for me to treat his family since they had been so supportive during my mother's illness. He made it sound like this was a reasonable expectation and that I should be grateful for the opportunity to show my appreciation. I sat there for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. These people had ambushed me. They had used my grief and my mother's memory as an excuse to get a free, expensive meal. They had planned this deception and executed it with smiles on their faces, never once considering how I might feel about being manipulated in this way. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I calmly reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and calculated exactly what my portion of the meal cost. I placed that exact amount on the table, stood up, and announced that I would be paying for my own dinner only. The table erupted. My mother-in-law started sputtering about how rude I was being. My father-in-law said I was being unreasonable, and my sister-in-law accused me of being selfish with money that I hadn't even earned. My husband was hissing at me to sit back down and stop causing a scene. But I was done. I told them that my mother's inheritance was not a community fund for their entertainment, that they had manipulated and deceived me, and that if they wanted an expensive dinner, they could pay for it themselves. I said that using my dead mother's money to subsidize their night out was disrespectful to her memory and to me. As I walked toward the restaurant exit, they were calling after me like a crowd of angry customers. My husband was trying to get me to come back, saying I was being pathetic and embarrassing. But for the first time all evening, I felt like I could breathe. The drive home was surreal. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, trying to figure out how I had missed the signs that this was a setup. How had my husband, the person who was supposed to protect and support me, participated in a scheme to manipulate me into spending my inheritance on his family? I thought about my mother and how she would have reacted to this situation. She had always taught me to stand up for myself and not let people take advantage of my kindness. She would have been proud of me for walking out, but she also would have been heartbroken that the man I married could treat me with such disrespect. When I got home, I tried to process what had just happened. This wasn't just about money. This was about trust, respect, and the fundamental values that should exist in a marriage. My husband had conspired with his family to deceive me, and then had acted like I was wrong for not going along with their plan. I waited up for him to come home, expecting him to walk through the door with an apology and an explanation. I thought maybe he would acknowledge that they had handled this badly, and that he understood why I was upset. I was hoping we could have a rational conversation about boundaries and respect. But when he finally came through the door at 3 o'clock in the morning, he was absolutely furious. He had clearly spent hours with his family, listening to them complain about my behavior and working himself up into a rage. The man who walked through our door was not the supportive husband I had married. He started yelling at me before he was even fully inside the house. He called me pathetic for getting up and walking out after his family had relied on me to pay for their food. He said I had humiliated him in front of his relatives and that my behavior was selfish and ungrateful. According to him, his family had been kind and supportive during my mother's illness, and the least I could do was show some appreciation by treating them to a nice dinner. He said that I had turned a lovely family evening into a disaster because I was too selfish to share my windfall with people who cared about me. The word windfall hit me like a slap. This wasn't a lottery ticket or a lucky investment. This was money from my dead mother. The fact that he could refer to it as a windfall showed how little he understood or cared about what this inheritance meant to me. As he continued yelling, I realized that he genuinely believed I was the villain in this situation. In his mind, I had embarrassed his family by refusing to pay for a dinner that they had simply assumed I would cover. He couldn't understand why I was upset about being deceived and manipulated. He said that I had caused a huge rift between me and his family, and that it would take a long time to repair the damage I had done to those relationships. He made it sound like I had committed some terrible crime by refusing to be financially exploited by people who had lied to me. What struck me most was his complete inability to acknowledge that what they had done was wrong. He never apologized for his role in the deception. He never admitted that they should have asked me beforehand instead of ambushing me at the restaurant. He never showed any understanding of why using my mother's inheritance money without my consent might be hurtful. Instead, he kept focusing on how his family felt humiliated and how I had damaged his reputation with his relatives. According to him, the real problem wasn't their manipulation. It was my refusal to go along with it quietly. The next day, I started getting text messages from various family members. Some were angry, calling me selfish and ungrateful. Others were more manipulative, saying they were disappointed in me and that my mother would have wanted me to be more generous with her final gift. That last comment particularly infuriated me. These people who barely knew my mother were now claiming to understand what she would have wanted me to do with her money. They were using her memory as a weapon to make me feel guilty for not funding their expensive night out. My husband continued to bring up the incident over the following days, each time acting like I owed his family an apology. He said that if I really loved him, I would make this right by apologizing and perhaps taking them out for another dinner to make up for my rude behavior. The more he talked, the clearer it became that he fundamentally didn't understand what they had done wrong. This wasn't a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. This was a calculated plan to manipulate me into spending money that belonged to me. And when I refused to be manipulated, I became the villain. So here's what I need you to help me figure out. Was I wrong to walk out of that restaurant when I discovered I had been set up to pay for everyone's dinner? Should I have just gone along with their plan to keep the peace, even though they had deceived me? Some people might say that I should have been more generous, that family is supposed to support each other, and that causing a scene at a restaurant was an overreaction. Others might argue that what they did was financial manipulation and emotional abuse, especially considering the money came from my deceased mother. But I keep coming back to the fundamental question of respect. How do you maintain a relationship with people who feel entitled to your money and who will deceive you to get it? When someone shows you that they value your wallet more than your feelings, what does that tell you about their true character? My husband still believes I owe his family an apology, and our marriage has been strained ever since that night. Part of me wonders if I should have just paid the bill to avoid all this conflict. But another part of me knows that my mother would have wanted me to stand up for myself. What do you think? Was I justified in walking out, or did I handle this situation wrong? Let me know in the comments, because I'm still trying to figure out if I'm surrounded by people who don't respect me, or if I'm really the selfish person they're making me out to be.